I was drinking my second cup of coffee, rubbing the stubble on my face, and thinking about the unpleasant task that awaited me. My wife and I had just returned late at night from a trip to Yellowstone Park with another couple. When we finally pulled up to the house, I only had enough energy to drag myself out of the van and fall into bed. Debbie had to go to work on Monday morning, but I was able to sleep for a couple more hours. I didn't have to leave work until 4 in the afternoon. My name is Dave Dawson, and my wife is Debbie. We got married just a year ago, last month. The trip was kind of an anniversary gift. Debbie had worked so much that she had saved up 5 days of vacation, so with the weekend, we had 9 days to travel and see the sights. So we decided to take a trip while the stars were aligned. Our friends, John and Katie Harrison, came with us. The four of us were able to drive to the park and back, which allowed us to spend 7 whole days there. John and Katie had a 15-month-old boy, and it just so happened that Katie's mom was free that week and could stay at their house and watch the baby. I pulled into the driveway and opened the side doors of my 2-year-old custom-built Chevy van. Can you imagine how much stuff 4 adults can accumulate in 9 days of traveling? That's exactly what I saw. John and Katie had managed to get most of their things out when we dropped them off last night. Looking at the mess, I sighed and started sorting through my things. Our suitcases were still on the floor along with a box of food, a cooler, camping gear, and a pile of dirty clothes. The suitcases were taken into the house. The dirty laundry went into the trash chute. The contents of the refrigerator went back into the freezer. The food went back into the pantry. And the camping and fishing gear went into the garage. I looked at the bed I had made in the back of the van and realized it would be better to take out the mattress and vacuum the entire floor. I got the vacuum cleaner and trash can out of the garage, opened the back doors, grabbed the bedding, and started pulling it out. The double mattress was custom-made and fit the width of the van perfectly. Finally, it came loose with a bang, and I fell on my butt as the mattress, bedding, and a pile of random junk spilled out. I got up, separated the bedding, and set it aside to wash. I grabbed the trash can and started filling it with everything that had fallen out with the mattress. McDonald's packaging, beer can lids, crumpled napkins, crushed styrofoam cups, condom wrappers. I stopped and stared at the last item in shock. I sat down, my head suddenly spinning, and thought, how did this get here? I smoothed out the torn wrapper on my knee. It said Trojan Ultra Thin. Something was wrong. I knew it even before we left for Yellowstone. I had cleaned the van thoroughly, removed the mattress, vacuumed, and put in fresh sheets before we loaded the car. I absent-mindedly flipped through the packet with my fingers, considering my options. Debbie had stopped taking her pills a month ago. We had decided to start a family as soon as she finished her first year of work. John and Katie had been open about her taking pills until their son turned 2. Then they planned to have a second child. I thought it might be a joke. John sometimes had a peculiar sense of humor, especially after a couple of beers. I pondered this possibility for a few minutes. Then I grabbed the trash can and dumped its contents onto the driveway. I began rummaging through the trash, examining it carefully, until I came across a roll of fabric. I examined it closely, carefully unwrapping it. When the last layer of fabric came off, my eyes fell on what were undoubtedly the remains of dried, crumpled rubber bands. No, this wasn't a joke. I suddenly felt nauseous, sat down abruptly, and buried my head between my knees, trying not to throw up. The logic was irrefutable. First, someone had done this in my van. Second, it wasn't me. Third, the only woman on this trip who could be pregnant was Debbie. Sitting hunched over, I thought about the details of our trip. John and Katie only slept in the van when we were on the road. When we stopped for the night, they took a 2-person tent with an air mattress and slept in that. Debbie and I slept alone in the van when we were at the park. We spent most of the week together, the 4 of us. We went for walks, went swimming, and saw the sights. Together, except for one day. On about the 4th day of our stay at the park, I wanted to go to a small lake about 5 miles away. There was a waterfall there, and there were rumors that there were big fish in the lake. I decided to take my fishing rod and some lures and try my hand at fishing. Katie was fine with that, but Debbie said she was tired and didn't want to go. John offered to stay with Debbie and go into town to get some groceries we were running low on. So, after an early lunch, Katie and I set off. More than 5 hours later, we returned to camp, tired but happy with our trip. Debbie and John made a dinner on our small gas stove and sat around drinking beer. They had obviously had more than they should have, judging by the bag full of empty bottles. They sipped their beer, Debbie giggled and laughed. She was clearly drunk. I noticed Katie frown when she saw what was happening. John's drinking was sometimes a problem, and apparently they often argued about it. We decided not to get involved for the time being, as John and Katie had pitched their tent just a few meters away from us. It was so warm that we slept with the van doors open except for the mosquito net. The next morning, John looked at me with a smug expression, as if he understood what we had been doing the night before. Now I realized that look meant, "You stupid idiot. I just entertained your wife and you don't even have a clue." And the sick feeling in my stomach told me that I was starting to believe it too. As I cleaned up the van and then grabbed a hose and started washing it down, my thoughts drifted back to 3 years ago, when I met Debbie. I had just turned 20 and was a sophomore at Northern Michigan University. I was studying electrical engineering and getting good grades, but financial problems were wearing me down. I had never received a scholarship, so for the past 2 years, I had been paying for my education with money I had saved from working in schools and at an auto plant during the summer. But the money was running out. I knew I wouldn't be able to earn enough to go to college that summer, and part-time jobs during the school year only brought in pocket change. My mom and dad couldn't help me either. We were Catholics, and I had 3 younger brothers and a sister. My parents insisted that we all attend the parish school, at least through ninth grade. As a result, they were still paying for the education of my 2 younger siblings. My older sister attended a public high school. I had 2 options: start taking out student loans and finish school with an unbearable financial burden, or drop out for 2 years and try to save enough money to finish school. I had already decided that taking a break would not be unreasonable. Constant deadlines and exams were exhausting. Besides, I was tired of living in a room with 4 people. No matter how hard you try, there's always at least one jerk among your roommates. I had already written a letter to the personnel department of the factory where I worked last summer, asking for a job. It was Friday evening and exams had just ended. A few people from the dorm decided to make their way through the half-meter of snow to a party off campus to celebrate. It was a typical frat party. You could drink as much beer as you wanted. Guys paid $5 and girls got in for free. The music was loud, some people were dancing in some rooms, and others were playing drinking games. By the end of the night, a few guys got lucky and ended up hooking up in one of the bedrooms upstairs. During college, I dated girls on and off, but I hadn't had a steady girlfriend since high school. Although I wasn't a virgin, I lost my virginity on prom night. I could count the number of girls I'd been with on one hand. The engineering program was difficult, and I was constantly working part-time jobs. I spent all my free time at the gym playing basketball and sometimes racquetball. When we got back to the house, one of my roommates, Josh, pointed to a group in the corner and I just nodded, saying I'd get him a beer. I made my way through the groups of dancing and talking guys, trying not to spill the beer from the 2 plastic cups I'd taken from a guy with a keg. Finally, I spotted Josh talking to a couple of girls at the far end of the room. When I reached him, he held out his hand, took one of the cups and said, "Dave, meet Miranda. We're in the economics program class of 202. This is her roommate, Debbie, and this is Dave." I smiled at Miranda, a pretty brunette, and held out my hand. "Hi, Miranda, nice to meet you." Then I turned to her roommate, held out my hand, and froze. Standing in front of me was one of the most beautiful girls I had ever seen. She had long, reddish blonde hair and green eyes that betrayed her Irish heritage, and her smile lit up the room. Finally, I was jolted back to reality by Josh, Miranda, and Debbie's laughter. I blushed and apologized. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude." I couldn't help myself. I looked Debbie straight in the eyes and said, "But you're the most beautiful girl I've ever met." Now she blushed. "Well, thank you, Ken. Girls never get tired of hearing compliments like that." And she laughed. Josh said, "You know, you two are practically neighbors. Debbie's from DeWitt." "No kidding. I'm from Okemo. Did you go to DeWitt High School?" "No. I went to Gabriel Catholic High School," she replied. "Hey, I'm Catholic too, but my parents couldn't afford it," I said. The two of us started talking and gradually moved away to a corner. Gabriel's was a medium-sized school serving about half a dozen parishes, including Debbie's and mine. Many of my friends from Catholic school went there. It turned out she knew some of them, and we both graduated the same year. We talked and talked, completely oblivious to the time, until finally Miranda came over and said, "I don't want to break you up, but it's midnight and it's snowing again. We have to get back to the dorm." Debbie looked at me with what I thought was regret and said, "Well, I guess I have to go." Trying not to look desperate, I said, Wait, I'd like to see you again. Can I call you? I smiled, embarrassed. Okay, I live in East Show Hall. Debbie, I don't even know your last name. Konigsnecht. I know. It's hard to pronounce, she said, a little embarrassed. I looked at her in surprise. You're K-13. The first Konigsnechts emigrated from Germany in the mid-1800s and settled in several communities in central Michigan. Over the next 100 years, they were so prolific that their children dominated many rural schools. The story goes that an angry teacher eventually nicknamed them K-13 because of the 13 letters in their surname. And the nickname stuck. Then she laughed. It's my fault. But my mother is Irish by blood. You won't believe it. I have an uncle who married a K-13 from the Standish area, I said. Really? Call me. Let's talk more. Miranda took her by the hand and pulled her toward the door. Sure, I replied, watching them walk off into the night. The next day, I called her. I was so fascinated by her that I couldn't wait. A day later, we met up to go to a pizza place. It was a weekday, but we spent several hours together talking about school, friends from home, and our families. After high school, her parents wanted her to go to college closer to home, but she was tired of her parents' pressure. She applied to several colleges in the state and chose the one furthest from home. 400 miles turned out to be enough distance to break the closest ties. Debbie studied marketing and had been working at the same retail chain for the past 2 years. She was hired as an intern in their commercial department for the upcoming holiday season. She was attending college on a partial scholarship and student loans, so it was very important for her to maintain good grades. She had 2 sisters, an older and a younger one. Her parents were still paying for her younger sister's high school education, and her older sister was attending a state college near Detroit. So they were very busy and could only offer her limited help. She admitted that she had been a cheerleader for her younger sister in high school, but had never tried out for the team when she was older. She loved the water and had worked as a lifeguard at a local country club for the last 2 summers of high school. From what I could tell, her parents were pretty strict with her and her sisters. She said she wasn't allowed to leave the house much during the school year. I later learned from Miranda through Josh that she was catching up on her schoolwork after she got into college. Guys lined up to ask her out on dates. She went on dates once or twice a week, but not regularly. I was determined to get closer to her. I asked her out again, and by the end of the semester, we were seeing each other regularly. We always had a good time. She had a great personality and a sense of humor. I could sit and listen to her for hours. She loved college parties, and we would have a couple of beers and dance a little. When the weather got warmer, I saw her in something other than boots and baggy sweatshirts. Damn, she was slim. Unlike her, I was just over 6 feet tall and weighed 190 pounds. I had brown hair, brown eyes, and regular but unremarkable features. Thanks to regular workouts, I was in good shape, but my appearance could be described as stocky. I had slightly dark skin, but I didn't stand out from the crowd. We dated until the end of the semester, about 6 weeks, but the whole time I knew she was seeing other guys. On our last date before the end of the semester, we agreed to meet up when we got home. We only lived 20 miles apart and she said she wanted to keep seeing me. But that was when I first told her about my decision not to return to college the following academic year. When she realized what I meant, she seemed to freeze and stare at me. I thought she accepted my decision and my reasons. But later that evening, instead of meeting up and hanging out somewhere together, she announced that she needed to study for an exam. Cutting our evening short, I drove her back to her dorm. She kissed me quickly, hugged me, and ran inside without saying a word about calling her when we got back home. Pensive, I went back to the dorm, wondering what had happened. After my last exam and before leaving campus, I tried to call her, but one of her roommates said she wasn't home. I knew her parents had come to pick her up, and I thought maybe they had gone somewhere else. Moving in with your parents and siblings is never easy. But we managed. The day after I got home, I went back to work at the factory. I was lucky to get a job as a quality control inspector on the day shift, at least for the first 90 days, and then I'll probably switch to another shift. I tried calling Debbie a couple of times in the evening at her parents' house, but they always said she wasn't home. I left my number, but I had a feeling she had dumped me. The thought broke my heart, but I suspected that if I kept pursuing her, nothing good would come of it. About a week later, I was surprised when my mom handed me the phone and said, "It's someone named Debbie." When I answered, Debbie apologized for not noticing my first calls and hoped I wasn't mad at her. I assured her I wasn't angry. We talked a little about our final exams and our new jobs. Finally, she said quietly, Dave, I was hoping you would call and ask me out on a date. I hoped you would, Debbie, but since I couldn't get through to you for the last 2 weeks, I thought you didn't want to talk to me. I said sadly. No, no, Dave, please don't think that. I admit I was a little upset when you said you weren't coming back to college. I didn't know what to think. But I'd like to see you again, she said. That's how a wonderful summer began. Since we were both working, we managed to see each other a couple of times a week, and I was sure she wasn't seeing anyone else. Over time, I got to know her family, and she got to know mine. We all became friends, except for my older sister. For some reason, she didn't seem to like Debbie, but I just didn't pay any attention to it. We went to the movies, had dinner, sometimes threw parties with her friends or my friends from school. A couple of times when we had the chance to spend the weekend together, we went to Lake Michigan. When I saw Debbie in her bikini, tears of joy came to my eyes. We fooled around in the lake, and she laughed at me when I put on my swim trunks and couldn't get out of the water. At the end of July, I decided that I couldn't live at home for 2 years until I had saved enough money to go back to school. I was making good money and figured I could afford a small apartment. But the most important reason was that I really wanted Debbie to live on her own. I was sure we were on the same page about where our relationship was going. Mom and Dad were supportive and helped me get some decent used furniture from friends and relatives. I moved out a few weeks before Debbie was due back at school. On the first weekend, we went out to dinner, and when we got back to the apartment, we both knew what was going to happen. Over the next 3 weeks, Debbie spent every other evening with me. One night, she told her parents she was staying at a friend's house and didn't come home until morning. It was wonderful. I wanted to know everything about her. We talked for hours. She told me how much she loved college, her classes, the people she was meeting, and the whole experience. She said her parents were still trying to control her social life. As her departure date drew nearer, I became increasingly depressed. On the last night we spent together, we talked. I said, Debbie, I know we've been avoiding this, but since you're leaving tomorrow, I think we need to talk about it. I think I love you, and I don't want to stop seeing you. Debbie lowered her head. I really like you, Dave. Maybe it's love, I don't know. But we've only been dating for a few months, and I don't want to stop seeing you. But we'll be living 400 miles apart for most of the school year, and we'll both be really busy. Trying not to sound desperate, I said, why don't we try to see each other a couple of times before Christmas break? Sure, Dave, we can try, she said without conviction. Debbie, I want you to know that you're the only girl for me, and I want to give you something before I leave. I took a jewelry box out of the nightstand and opened it for her. Inside was a white gold ring with an amethyst and diamonds on the sides. Amethyst was her birthstone. Debbie's eyes widened and she pressed her hands to her mouth. Oh, Dave, it's beautiful. Debbie, I want you to wear it. And when you look at it, please think of me. She slipped the ring on her finger and hugged me with tears in her eyes. Of course I will, Dave. After that evening, we only spoke on the phone once before she left. I offered to give Debbie a ride, but her father had bought her a 5-year-old car so she could get around on her own. I was disappointed by our conversation that evening and by her lack of enthusiasm for what I was trying to say. I wanted her to be my girlfriend. I wanted us to have an exceptional relationship. If we were still in school, I would have asked her out on a date. Instead, I was afraid she was trying to reject me in a nice way. After Debbie left, I did almost nothing but work. A few times a week, I went to the YMCA with the guys and played basketball. I spent almost every weekend at my parents' house where they made sure I was fed. Every day, I called Debbie's dorm. About half the time, she was home. I also texted her a couple of times a week. We talked and wrote about her coming to see me or me going to see her, but we never came to an agreement. Eventually, the calls and emails became less frequent. A couple of weeks after Debbie left, I was offered the chance to take a test for an electrician's apprenticeship program at work. It could take 2 to 4 years depending on how many hours I worked per month, but I would get 2 years of college credit. The pay was about 20% higher than what I was making now, and the company paid for college-level technical courses. Even if I left before finishing college, I would still be making more. I passed the exam with no problem. After a while, I started the program. I really enjoyed the apprenticeship. I had always loved gadgets, stereo equipment, and anything else related to electronics. That's what got me into electrical engineering. And I had always loved tools. I had the opportunity to work overtime with virtually no restrictions. As I gained experience, the electrician trainees asked me to help them with odd jobs for which we were usually paid. With that money, I could buy anything I wanted in terms of toys, but I still had a dream of finishing school. I didn't even go on dates, even though I often had the opportunity. I was in love with Debbie, and that was my second dream. So the money stayed in the bank or was invested in a few things. A couple of weeks before Thanksgiving, during one of our now rare phone calls, Debbie reminded me that she would be home on Wednesday evening before Thanksgiving and wouldn't leave until Sunday. She said she hoped to spend most of that time with me. For the first time since she had left, I was excited about seeing her again. We agreed to meet at her house after Thanksgiving dinner. Seeing her again was like an instant rush of alcohol. I stumbled, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. Her parents were happy to see me, and her two sisters greeted me warmly. Her father and I hit it off right away when we found out that the K-13 my uncle had married was a distant relative of his. And I don't think either of us was too happy that Debbie hadn't been home since she left for college. I spent a couple of hours there, ate dessert, and watched football. Eventually, I asked Debbie if she wanted to go to the movies. Debbie happily agreed, and we quickly left, ignoring her parents' obvious disappointment. We drove straight to my house, fell onto the bed, and got down to business. This time, when it was time for Debbie to leave, we knew there were only a few weeks left until Christmas break. This time, I kissed Debbie goodbye, feeling better about our separation and our relationship. 3 weeks later, it was Thanksgiving again. It seemed like we had never been apart. I had 2 weeks off because the auto plant was closed for the holidays, so we had plenty of time to spend together. We went to Christmas parties and did holiday shopping. She spent time with my family, and I spent time with hers. I helped her father with the electrical wiring in the basement he was finishing, and we became lifelong friends. For Christmas, I gave her amethyst earrings and a pendant to match her ring. She also gave me two very nice cable knit sweaters that I thought looked great on me. We spent more and more time at my apartment. She stayed over a couple of times. I didn't know what she told her parents, so I didn't ask. I already knew then that I would be happy to spend the rest of my life with her. The day before she had to go back to school, we talked again about breaking up and seeing each other every month. She evaded the question again and didn't want to make any promises. Another thing that made me unhappy was that I told her several times that I thought I was in love with her. And every time she smiled, hugged me, or kissed me, but didn't reciprocate. I brought it up on our last day together. Hugging her, I said, "Debbie, I know you're uncomfortable talking about your feelings. I love you and want us to have a future. But you're making it clear that you don't feel the same way about me." With tears in her eyes, she looked at me. "Please, Dave, I love being with you and doing things with you. Can't we just be happy when we're together?" "I'm happy when we're together, Debbie. I just want to see you more often. I want you to know that there's no one else for me. I hope you feel the same way." For the first time, Debbie turned away and didn't look at me. "Dave, we've been apart for so long. I don't expect you to sit at home with no purpose in life." "Debbie, I don't want to date anyone else. No one can compare to what we have. I hope you feel the same way." Debbie hugged and kissed me, and we forgot about our conversation for a while. Later, thinking back on it, I realized that she never answered me. I knew she wasn't as attached to our relationship as I was. Whenever I thought about it, I became sad and depressed. So I tried to keep myself busy as best I could. I took all the overtime I could get, worked a part-time job every week, attended my required college classes, and spent a couple of hours at the YMCA several times a week in the mornings. A few weeks into the vacation, one of the electricians started telling everyone about a house he was selling. His father had died a year earlier, and the house was part of the inheritance. The house was dilapidated, but it was in a good neighborhood and close to a good school. His family just wanted to get rid of it and was willing to sell it for a small amount. They were even willing to sign a 5-year lease with an option to buy, just to get rid of it. I decided to take a closer look as the payments were only slightly higher than my rent. It was a large 2-story house with over 2,000 square feet of living space. It had 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and was located on a large corner lot. The only thing I didn't like was that the large garage was not attached to the house but was located behind it, about 50 feet away. The house needed serious repairs. My parents had lived in the house for 40 years and had done almost no renovations, but I knew that if I could get everything done before the 5-year lease expired, the house would be worth 3 or 4 times what I paid for it, and getting a mortgage would be no problem. I made an offer, and after a little haggling, we closed the deal. A couple of weeks later, I moved out of my apartment and into the new house. I didn't tell Debbie because I wanted to surprise her, but I was surprised myself when she didn't seem to notice. I kept trying to get Debbie to come over. Finally, I said that if she couldn't come, I would go to her. She replied that maybe we could meet halfway. We set a date for a couple of weeks later, and I took a couple of days off work. As the date approached, the weather in Sao Paulo got worse, and it seemed like one snowstorm followed another. A couple of days before our meeting, she called and said that she was having car trouble and wanted to postpone the trip because of the weather. I was terribly disappointed, but I agreed, and when we hung up, my mood was ruined. It looked like the next opportunity to see each other would be during spring break. In the meantime, I'm spending my free time working on the house. I asked one of the carpenters at work, who was also a builder, to help me design how I wanted the house to look after the renovation. The finished design was quite ambitious, but deep down I wanted to create a home that Debbie would want to live in someday. I set my priorities. First, I wanted to finish the kitchen, then the bathroom, and then the rest of the rooms. When the weather improves, I will start on the exterior. The renovation cost me a pretty penny if you count the materials, but the labor costs were minimal. Most of the craftsmen at the factory traded jobs with each other. I did the same. I did electrical and general work for those who needed it, and carpenters, glaziers, painters, and heating and air conditioning specialists did work for me in return. A couple of weeks before spring break, Debbie's father, Carl, called me. I'd kept in touch with him and Debbie's mother, Angela. I even stopped by their house a couple of times after Christmas. Both Carl and Angela knew how I felt about Debbie. They sympathized with my disappointment, which was reflected in their attempts to maintain a distant relationship with her. When I answered Carl's phone call, he said, "How do you feel about Debbie's plans for spring break?" I was puzzled. "What do you mean? Don't you know?" "I haven't talked to her in a week, but I assume she's coming home," I said. "She called last night. She's planning to go to Corpus Christi with a couple of friends." He was clearly disappointed. I asked her what you said when she texted you, but she didn't tell me. "I can't believe she didn't tell you about it." No, she didn't say a word. I don't know what's gotten into her, I really don't. I asked her if she was going to stop by on her way to Texas, and she said no. Her friend Miranda lives in Milwaukee, and they're going to drive there to pick up a car. So they'll drive through Wisconsin and continue south. They plan to return the same way. When the meaning of his words sank in, I felt angry at Debbie for the first time. Could she really have been so indifferent that she didn't even talk to me about it? She knew how much I wanted to spend my vacation with her. I had told her I couldn't wait for her to see the house. I had hoped to hear her opinion on the design, and I asked for a couple of days off so we could spend 4 days together while she was home. I said bitterly, "It looks like she's already made up her mind, Carl. I guess our relationship isn't important enough to her to talk to me first." "I'm sorry, Dave. You don't deserve that either," he said. We talked for a few more minutes, then hung up. Sitting in the dilapidated kitchen of what I had hoped would one day be our home, I realized that no matter how much you want or hope for something, it's not enough to make it happen. I now knew that our relationship was mostly one-sided. My dreams were not her dreams. There was nothing I could do to make her love me the way I loved her. I shook my head and wiped my eyes. I felt as if a close relative had died unexpectedly. When that happens, you feel a tremendous loss. You don't stop loving that person, but you realize that you have to accept it and move on. The next day, when I came home from college, there was a message from Debbie on my answering machine. "Dave, I'm sorry I missed you. Call me as soon as you hear this message. I really want to talk to you. Thanks, sweetie." Her voice sounded cheerful and upbeat. I suspected she wanted to scold me for not coming home for spring break. I shook my head, deleted the message, and left for work. The next day, I worked almost until the end of my shift. As I walked through the kitchen, I noticed another message on the answering machine. It was from Debbie again. This time, it wasn't so cheerful. "Dave, honey, please call me. I talked to Dad last night, and he said he told you that my plans for spring break have changed. Please call me, okay? I'll explain everything. I'll be at the dorm all day." This time, I detected a slight alarm in her voice. Her father must have scolded her for not talking to me first. I deleted the message again and went about my business. A couple of days later, my mom called and asked what had happened with Debbie. I asked what she meant. She said Debbie had called and asked for my new address. When I asked why she hadn't talked to me, she was evasive. I replied hesitantly, "Debbie and I aren't seeing each other anymore." My mom gasped, "Dave, why? What happened?" "We didn't see eye to eye on what was important to us," I said quietly. "I'm so sorry, dear. I know how hard this is for you. Why don't you come over for dinner on Sunday and we'll celebrate your birthday? Okay?" Saturday was indeed my birthday, but since I was planning to go to a bar, a few guys from work asked me to go with them. So I told her I'd come on Sunday. That's how I spent my 21st birthday. The guys invited me to a party. I had a few drinks, danced a little with some girls, and turned down a couple of offers for something more. I didn't hear from Debbie, but I wasn't expecting to. I wasn't sure she even remembered my birthday, even though we had talked about hers a couple of months earlier. The next day, I had dinner with my family. Both of my brothers and my sister were there. My sister Angie was now a freshman at a state university 30 miles from home. My mom made my favorite dishes, and everyone gave me gifts. It was a wonderful time. After dinner, Angie stayed with me alone and asked what had happened with Debbie. Angie and I, being close in age, had always been close. I told her everything that had happened over the past year, all the disappointments associated with trying to save our relationship, and I got to the turning point when she dumped me to go on spring break down south. "Dave, I know you wondered why I wasn't very interested in Debbie when you started dating her," she said. She said, "I never told you that I knew Debbie's younger sister, Sarah. Not very well, but well enough to talk to her. We were both in the same Catholic youth group in high school. After you two started dating, I sat and talked to her at one of our meetings. I mentioned that I knew someone who was dating her sister. I didn't tell her it was my brother. She talked a lot about Debbie. I don't think she liked her very much. According to her, Debbie was selfish and self-centered. And because of her looks, she always got everything she wanted. She said that even in high school, she had at least 2 boyfriends, and she was always on the lookout for another one. And no matter how much her parents tried to restrict her social life, she still managed to go out a lot." I thought about what she had said for a moment. Then she just shrugged and replied sadly, "I don't know, Angie. I never noticed that about her. All I know is that I loved her, and I think I still do. But I just can't live like this. If she doesn't feel the same way about me as I do about her, then maybe we should just break up." Angie hugged me and said nothing more. The following weekend, Debbie's father, Carl, came by my house. I showed him around the house and the property and showed him half a dozen projects I was working on. He was amazed. "You told me how much you paid for this house," he asked. When I told him, he said, "Wow, with all the work and repairs, that house is worth 3 or 4 times what you paid for it." He shook his head. "I can't believe you're only 21. That's an excellent investment for someone twice your age." He looked at me intently. "Dave, I want you to know that I would be proud to have you as my son-in-law. I've never met anyone who has worked so hard to achieve their goal." A little embarrassed, I replied, "Thanks, Carl, but we never got that far in our relationship." Carl looked me straight in the eye. "Maybe not, Dave, but we understood how you felt about Debbie. And I knew where she was on those nights when she said she was going to a friend's house. No, don't worry about it. We always thought she was safe with you. I'm just sorry it didn't work out between you two." I just shrugged and changed the subject. But as he walked out the door, he said, "Not that it matters to you, but she called and said she got to Corpus Christi okay." And he left. For the next few months, my daily life remained the same. Work at the factory, chores around the house, occasional odd jobs, a couple of hours in class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, basketball at the YMCA on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. The only thing that changed was that with the warmer weather, I started working outside. But I was happy with how the housework was coming along, and I found that the more I worked, the better I slept at night. If I couldn't sleep, I thought about Debbie and how much I missed her. And when I missed her, I couldn't sleep. It was a vicious circle that was impossible to break out of. After I got back from Texas, I got another phone message from her. I deleted it as soon as I heard her voice. A month after spring break, it was Debbie's birthday. I thought about it for a long time, but finally sent her a card. It was pretty simple. I just signed it. I just wanted her to know that I remembered. Then work started again. On Saturday, Memorial Day, around noon, I heard someone knocking on the front door. The factory had been closed for 3 days, and I was hoping to finish a project in the yard and had been working on it since 9 in the morning. Opening the door, I asked somewhat irritably, "Yes?" Everything I could say instantly stuck in my throat. Debbie was standing in the doorway. She was beautiful as always, and I still held my breath. Her eyes were wide open and her face was frozen in shock. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered, she stammered. Then she whispered, Dave, what happened to you? What? I looked down at myself and thought, what does she mean? I was standing there in worn khakis, work boots, and no shirt. A belt with carpenter's tools hung from my hips. I was covered in sweat and a thin layer of sawdust from the circular saw I had been turning on and off all morning. And then I realized that Debbie hadn't seen me in 6 months. I knew I had lost 5 or 6 pounds since then. Since I bought the house in January, I had been working like a madman, and when she left for spring break, my efforts doubled. I hardly sat down at the table and showed no interest in food. The fat that used to hang off me was practically gone. From the way my clothes fit, I could tell I had lost a couple of inches in my waist and gained some in my chest and shoulders. In addition, I hadn't shaved in more than a day, so I had quite a bit of stubble. When it got warmer, I also got a haircut. Now that I thought about it, it seemed like I was living on the edge. I opened the door wide. Come in, I'll turn off the radio. I walked away from the door into the dining room and turned off the music. I turned to Debbie, who was standing at the entrance to the house. She looked a little awkward when I stared at her. She was wearing white shorts, sandals, and a tight pastel-colored top. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail, and she was wearing sunglasses. I noticed that she was wearing the amethyst ring I had given her. She looked good. Just seeing her lifted my spirits. Sorry, I had the radio on while I was working in the yard and didn't hear the doorbell. I must look rude. I wasn't expecting any guests. I felt awkward. No, you look fine, Dave. You just look different, that's all. I just wanted to see how you were doing. Dad said he stopped by the other day and was impressed with the house. It looks big. Finally, she looked away from me and surveyed the living room. Would you like to see the house? I asked with a smile. Would you mind? She replied somewhat timidly. Of course not. I'm actually quite proud of how it's all laid out, I said, and she followed me. The house is about 200 square meters. It originally had 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. I remodeled it, and now there are 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. 2 full bathrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs. As you can see, we are rebuilding the fieldstone fireplace in the living room, and this piece of oak timber leaning against the wall will become a mantelpiece. The floors downstairs are original solid wood. When everything is finished, I plan to restore the floor. We walked through the dining room, and I pointed to the blueprints on the kitchen table. My builder friend drew up the plans for how I want everything to look. I think it will take over a year to complete. I led her into the kitchen, the only room I had finished. It had new appliances, marble countertops, and new cabinets. The kitchen is the only room that's 100% finished at this point, down to the paint, I said. It's beautiful. She ran her hands over the marble. Let's go upstairs so I can show you the exterior. We climbed the stairs and walked down the hallway. The master bedroom overlooks the backyard and has its own bathroom. I replaced the stool, sink, vanity, and bathtub. All that's left is to put in the floor and paint the walls. I led her past my double bed, which was covered with an antique quilt. I turned to look at her and saw that she was looking at the nightstand. Next to the phone and bedside lamp was a 5x7 photograph of her. It was the same photograph she had given me for Christmas. Finally, she looked away and glanced at the bathroom. Wow, a jacuzzi, she said. Yeah. I ignored the obvious comment that it was big enough for 2. Then I led her through the hall. The last bedroom was so small that I decided to split it up. Part of it will be combined with the walk-in closet in the master bedroom to make a large enough walk-in closet. I'm going to turn the other half into a full bathroom. I showed her the other 2 bedrooms, one of which was completely empty, and the other was being used as my office. The only furniture was a bed, a desk, a couple of chairs, 2 bookshelves, and a small TV. We stepped back and stood on the top step, looking through the open beam ceiling into the living room, which emphasized the size of the house. Debbie put her hand on my shoulder and said, Dave, this house is huge. What are you going to do with all this space? Looking at her, I replied slowly, well, when I bought it, I didn't think I'd be living here alone. When the meaning of my words became clear, Debbie blushed and quickly withdrew her hand. Trying to diffuse the awkward situation, I said, come on, I'll show you the back of the house and the garage. I led her down the stairs, through the dining room, and out through sliding glass doors onto a partially finished patio. This is what I've been working on this week. It's a 220 square foot deck on 2 levels with steps leading down to the backyard. It'll be big enough for a gas grill, a table, chairs, and even a hot tub. I'm also planning to build a fence to enclose about 2,000 square feet of yard, enough to put in a pool someday. He led her to the garage, which stood 50 feet from the house. I know it's just a garage. It's designed for 2.5 cars, but it has a large attic for storage. I plan to build a loft on the side of the house and make a workshop there. That's pretty much everything except the basement, which has enough space for a finished recreation room. Debbie slowly surveyed the garage, the house, and the yard. Well, Dave, it's obvious you're proud of what you've done here, and I can see why. But how can you afford all this? I scratched my neck and smiled. Well, I don't pay for labor. I do most of the work myself or trade with other guys. And I get discounts on building materials. And to be honest, I don't have anything to spend my money on except this house. I see, she said thoughtfully. We chatted as we walked down the driveway to her car. Dave, I want to thank you for the birthday card. It was really sweet of you to remember, she said quietly. I just smiled and nodded. She started to get into the car but stopped and looked me in the face. Dave, Mom and Dad asked me to ask if you'd like to come over for dinner on Monday. Dad's going to barbecue. It'll just be family and maybe my sister's boyfriend. I shoved my hands in my pockets and stared at the ground, thinking about what she said. Finally, I looked up at her and said, Won't you be embarrassed? I mean, with me there? No, Dave. It would mean a lot to me if you came. Please, she said, looking me straight in the eye. Sure, I'll be there. What time? With a big smile on her face, she replied, Around 2. Bring some beer, okay? Smiling back, I said, I will. I watched her pull out of the driveway and drive away. When I turned to go back into the house, I realized I was smiling. In fact, I had been smiling almost the entire time she was here. On Memorial Day, I cleaned myself up and even shaved. I put on some decent shorts, a polo shirt, and sandals, grabbed a six-pack from the fridge, and headed over to her place. Debbie greeted me warmly at the door and kissed me on the cheek in surprise. Taking me by the hand, she led me through the house to the backyard. Her mom and dad greeted me like the son they never had. I had met her sisters last Christmas. Now she introduced me to her older sister's fiancé and her younger sister's boyfriend. Debbie's older sister Elizabeth was a more attractive version of her father. She had just graduated from college with a degree in financial management. She and her fiancé were planning to get married in the fall. Her younger sister, Sarah, was growing up and becoming more and more like Debbie. And to be honest, smarter. She was just as beautiful, but different. She had just graduated from high school and enrolled in a community college near home. She was something of a math whiz. She hadn't decided yet whether she would major in accounting or engineering. We had a great time. Her father and I talked at length about my house, and her mother chimed in from time to time. They were both very interested in how everything was arranged. Debbie didn't say anything, but her sisters listened attentively and chimed in with their own comments from time to time. Sarah and Debbie helped with the food, and I kept catching them glancing at me and whispering to each other. After dinner, we all sat around drinking beer and talking. I noticed that no one mentioned spring break or Texas. I asked Debbie if she had seen Josh this school year. We had stopped talking, and I was curious to know how he was doing. She said she had only seen him once all semester, but Miranda had seen him from time to time and had even gone out with him a couple of times. Later in the evening, I said I thought it was time to go home. I thanked Carl and Angela for dinner, said goodbye to everyone, and headed for the door. Debbie jumped up, walked over to my mom, whispered something to her and said, I'll walk you to your car. She took my arm and we walked to my car and stopped. She looked at me and said, Dave, can we talk? There's a small park at the end of the block. There are picnic tables there and no one will bother us. Suspecting that the conversation would most likely be about my dinner invitation, I just nodded, and we continued down the street. We chatted about nothing in particular until we finally reached the park. We sat down across from each other. We were both silent until Debbie fidgeted and finally clasped her hands and looked at me. Dave, I want to apologize for what I did to you during spring break. I know I was wrong. I should have talked to you, but I wanted to avoid conflict. Then, when you didn't answer my calls, I decided to write to you, but I didn't know what to say. When I had the chance to leave, all I could think about was that I only had 2 years left in college and this might be my last chance. It was selfish, I know. I didn't think about how you would feel. I knew you wouldn't be happy with me, but I didn't think you would cut me out of your life. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I understand. You made a decision about what's important to you. It was painful and hurtful, but I understand, I said calmly. I shrugged. But now it's over and so are we. We can both move on. She began to cry openly. But Dave, I don't want to break up with you, please. I miss you and want to be with you. Break up with me. Debbie, we were never together. Every time I wanted to get close to you, you kept me at a distance. You made it clear that you value your independence more than our relationship. If you don't feel the same way about me as I do about you, then I need to accept that and move on. She looked down at her hands. I know, Dave. I was afraid to commit. I felt like you were rushing me. The last few months without you have taught me a lot. I've realized that I really love you, and I hope you still love me. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. Debbie, I never stopped loving you. I just realized that I couldn't stop loving you back. Debbie looked at me through her tears. Can we try again, Dave? I thought about it for a few minutes, but I knew right away that this was what I wanted more than anything else in the world. I work nights and you work days. It'll be hard for us to see each other, I said. That doesn't matter, Dave. I'll do whatever you want. I think I can get out of working overtime on Saturday night. Let's plan something for Saturday or Saturday night, okay? That would be great, Dave, she said, smiling and wiping the tears from her eyes. That's how our reconciliation began. The first couple of weeks were slow, but then we were inseparable again. During the week, I was still completely absorbed in work and household chores, but we spent the weekends together. I gave up working overtime on weekends to make time for her. Debbie started staying over on weekends. I don't know what her parents thought about it, but I know they were happy we were back together. I involved Debbie in choosing paint, carpets, and curtains for the house. She also had great taste in landscaping. She started coming over a couple of times a week while I was at work to finish the project she was helping me with. Once or twice, I came home from work and found her asleep in my bed. Of course, she didn't go to work those days. The summer flew by. The car I had been driving for several years started needing repairs. I traded it in for a nearly new van. At the end of the summer, Debbie and I spent a few weekends loading it up and going camping at Lake Michigan. The last weekend before Debbie had to go back to school, we both took Friday off and went to Wilderness State Park for 3 days. On Saturday, we lay on the beach and basked in the sun after a brisk swim in Lake Michigan. As we lay there, I began to gently stroke her face. She turned and smiled at me. Oh my God, Dave, wasn't yesterday enough for you? It's never enough with you, Debbie, I said. She rolled over toward me and we lay face to face, kissing gently. Debbie, will you marry me? I asked. What did you say? She gasped and pulled away from me. I sat up and took a box out of my beach bag. I opened it and held it up to her. I think you heard me, Debbie. Will you marry me? She sat up and looked at the 3/4 carat diamond engagement ring in the box. Oh my God, Dave, it's beautiful. I took out the ring and slipped it on her finger. Does that mean yes? Yes, it means yes, Dave. I love you, I really do. The rest of the trip, we talked about the wedding and how we were going to live. We both agreed that it would be best to wait until she finished school. We decided to set the date for the following summer, probably in late July or August. We both knew we wanted children, but decided it would be best to wait until Debbie had started her career. I took a day off work the day before Debbie had to go back to school. Debbie, our parents, and I went to a restaurant to celebrate our engagement. The 3 women planned to get together at Christmas to plan the wedding. Debbie and I agreed that we would decide on a date by then. Debbie stayed over, and we talked quietly until morning. This time, we decided to see each other at least once a month during the school year. I offered to drive her home, but she said she'd rather drive herself or meet me halfway between her school and my house. During her senior year, Debbie planned to live off campus. Several friends, including Miranda, had offered to let her live with them. Her share of the expenses would be no more than the cost of a dorm room. She said she was tired of living on campus, and since she had a car, getting to class was no problem. The next day, I kissed her goodbye and watched her get into her car and drive north. She had barely made it to the end of the street before I started missing her. I returned to the routine I had established over the previous year. Now I had a goal: to finish renovating the house before our wedding. On weekends, I tried to relax a little and spend more time with my family. On Sundays, I constantly received invitations to dinner from my in-laws. To be honest, I alternated every weekend. Debbie's younger sister, Sarah, came home from college, so she usually came to dinner too. When she came, we always had a good time and enjoyed talking. On the last weekend of September, Debbie came home for her older sister's wedding. As expected, she and Sarah were bridesmaids. The wedding went off without a hitch, and everyone had a great time. Debbie and I danced, drank, and laughed throughout the reception. When October arrived, Debbie and I planned to meet up at the end of the month. A couple of days before, she called and said there was a snowstorm and her car's brakes had failed. She didn't think she would be able to make it. I said I would come and stay with her. She declined, preferring to reschedule our meeting for the following weekend. She needed to get her car inspected and was confident the weather would be milder. I rebooked my motel room in Mackinac City. We met the following Friday and had a pleasant weekend sightseeing, including a trip to Mackinac Island. When she arrived, she looked distraught and out of sorts. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she was worried about her schoolwork and exams. As we sat down to dinner that first evening, I took her hands and noticed something. I asked, "Debbie, where's your wedding ring?" Debbie looked at her hand as if she hadn't noticed. She blushed and replied, "I was washing the dishes before I left and took it off. I just forgot to put it back on." Then I raised my hand, which was wearing an amethyst ring. "I must be absent-minded. I probably took one and forgot the other," she replied unconvincingly. "Well, next time remember the diamond and forget the other one," I joked and left the subject for later. The Thanksgiving holiday arrived, and we spent 4 wonderful days together. Debbie spent most of her time at my place. I showed her how things were going, we discussed some of her decorating ideas, and I added them to my list of projects. We also bought some lamps and rugs. When Debbie returned home for Christmas, she said that her car was still having problems and, given the record snowfall in Upper Pennsylvania, she didn't know how many times she would be able to visit that winter. I knew that even in the best weather, the trip would be an exhausting 6-hour drive. Her father and I looked at the car and decided it wasn't worth investing much money in it. I ended up buying a 2-year-old Jeep that was still under warranty. The mechanic looked it over and said it was healthy. I gave it to Debbie and told her that now I had no excuse not to drive her home. I said it jokingly, but she didn't seem to find it funny. Debbie and my mom finalized the wedding plans. The date was set, the parish church and reception hall were booked. They took care of all the other details, and I was glad that all I had to do was put on a tuxedo and show up. I arrived in St. Ignatius for the Valentine's Day weekend and met Debbie. It was too snowy and cold to do anything but admire the rugged beauty of the coastline and the view of the bridge. But I had booked a room with a hot tub at the hotel, and we spent most of our time there, making up for 6 weeks of separation. Debbie had planned to stay home for spring break, but I was caught up with work. I was asked to go to Van Nuys, California for training on how to install new equipment that was due to arrive at our plant at the start of the new model year. The training was supposed to last about 2 weeks and fell during spring break. I tried to get out of it, but I was told I had no choice. Debbie was as disappointed as I was when I told her. We knew that the next opportunity to see each other would not be for another couple of weeks. A few days after I broke the news to her, she called me. She asked if I would mind if she went to Florida with her roommate since I would not be home for spring break. We discussed the idea, and I made it clear that I wasn't very enthusiastic about it and didn't think it was appropriate for a girl who was engaged. I would feel better if she didn't go. Besides, I wondered how she could afford it. She assured me somewhat dismissively that she could take care of herself and that I had nothing to worry about. Her roommates offered to pay for most of the expenses if she went in their SUV. The whole conversation made me feel uncomfortable. It was as if the call was just a formality to confirm what she had said, and that she had already made up her mind. I felt the same way I did last year when she had treated me so dismissively to get her way. I didn't think much of it and continued to prepare for my trip to California. The trip was long and tiring. We worked 10 to 12 hours a day, and we were only able to take 1 day off to see the sights. I couldn't keep in touch with Debbie, but she kept in touch with her parents, and I kept in touch with them. When I got home, Debbie had already left for school. The next morning, I called her early to talk to her, and to my surprise, a man answered the phone. Not sure if I had the right number, I asked, "Who is this?" "Tom. Who are you looking for?" "Debbie Koenigsegg. Is this her number?" "Yes, hold on a second." I heard him call Debbie's name. In the background, I heard Debbie say, "What?" And the man replied, "The phone." I thought I heard Debbie whisper, "You know you're not supposed to answer the phone. Who is it?" And the man replied, "I don't know. Some guy." Debbie picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" "It's me, Debbie," I said quietly. "Hello, dear. You're calling very early. How is it in California?" She asked hurriedly. "Nothing special except for the inside of the factory. Who answered your phone?" "Oh, it's Tom, Miranda's boyfriend." "On a weekday? So early in the morning?" "Well, he sometimes stays over at Miranda's. You know how it is, Dave." She said this somewhat defensively. "Yeah, I know how it is, Debbie, but I don't like guys staying at my fiancé's house," I said, a little disappointed. "Dave, you don't have anything to worry about. They've been dating for a long time. Will we see each other soon? I missed you while I was on vacation, honey." I let her distract me, and we agreed to meet in Harbor Springs in a couple of weeks. I asked her about Florida, and she replied vaguely that they had had a good time and the weather was great. The conversation left me with an uneasy feeling, but it faded in the flurry of activity leading up to graduation and wedding preparations. Harbor Springs was the last place we saw each other before graduation. Debbie was doing well in all her classes and wanted to finish school on time. It was a remarkable achievement. The chain of stores where she had been interning for the past 2 years offered her a full-time manager position, and she accepted. Debbie's parents and I had already agreed that we would attend the ceremony. When I mentioned this to Debbie, she tried to downplay the importance of her presence. The ceremony was only supposed to last an hour, and she wanted to leave right after it. But I assured her that I would not miss this event for anything, and that was the end of the conversation. As graduation day approached, Carl, Angela, and I decided to go together. The ceremony was scheduled for Thursday morning at 11 o'clock. We were disappointed when Debbie told us she would be at a graduation party the night before. The next morning, she and her roommates would be busy returning their apartment to the landlord and traveling directly to the auditorium. So even though we arrived the night before, we would not see her until after the ceremony. Most graduation ceremonies are the same. School officials, distinguished alumni, and the guest of honor give speeches, and then the graduates are called up to receive their diplomas. Then all the graduates throw their caps in the air, and that's it. We left the auditorium and went outside, where graduates were crowding around, congratulating each other and their families. And of course, we took pictures in our gowns, expressing relief or surprise that we had finally waited for this moment. Finally, we spotted Debbie among a group of graduates posing for photos. When we approached, Debbie saw us, separated herself from the group, came over, hugged and kissed us all. She excitedly showed us her diploma, and we took turns taking pictures with her in our robes. Her father told her something about saying hello to her friends. Debbie looked back at the group still crowding around her and quickly said, "Most of them aren't friends, just acquaintances. But there's one person you should meet. Wait here. I'll bring her over." And she rushed into the crowd and disappeared into it. A couple of minutes later, she emerged, dragging a familiar face behind her. "Mom, Dad, this is Miranda, my roommate. Dave, you remember Miranda, right?" I said. "Of course. It's good to see you again, Miranda. Long time no see." Miranda looked awkward as we all shook her hand. We chatted for a few minutes, and finally I asked, "Miranda, is Josh here? He graduated too, right? I was hoping to see him." Miranda shook her head and replied, "He's not here, Dave. I think he found a job somewhere on the West Coast and moved away." Debbie quickly interjected, "Dave, Mom, Dad. Miranda agreed to be my maid of honor. Isn't that great?" Everyone immediately began discussing this wonderful news. I couldn't help but notice that Miranda didn't seem thrilled with the idea. After a few minutes of discussion, Miranda excused herself and said she needed to meet someone. She stepped aside and joined a group of 3 or 4 guys who, I noticed, were looking at us. One of them looked annoyed. I mentioned this to Debbie, and as soon as she looked in that direction, she said, "We have to go. My car is loaded and waiting in the parking lot." She took my hand and pulled me away from the crowd, and Carl and Angela followed her. After stopping for a festive lunch at one of the city's fine restaurants, we began the long drive home. I was driving the Jeep and Debbie was sitting next to me. Her parents sat in the back. The trip was fun. Debbie and I chatted about the wedding, our honeymoon plans, and everything else under the sun. I was disappointed when Debbie said she was going to spend the night with her parents. She sympathized with me, but said she needed to stay home for a couple of days and spend time with them. Her parents didn't agree to let her move in with me before the wedding, even though they knew we often spent the night together. The weeks before the wedding flew by. We were both working and trying to get as much done around the house as possible. Most of the interior was finished except for the parquet floors, which needed to be sanded. I did the rough finishing of the workshop above the garage, but I would finish it in the winter. I was beginning to doubt that the house would ever be ready. The wedding day flew by in a blur. Debbie was a beautiful bride, and everything went wonderfully. The wedding was small, with only about 150 guests. I was surprised that Miranda was the only person Debbie invited from college, and she didn't even bring her boyfriend. But everyone had a great time. The next day, we left for our honeymoon on the Caribbean island of St. Martin. We spent 10 wonderful days in the sun. Every evening, we ate exquisite meals. We drank Heineken beer, French wine, and piña coladas. I think we made love every day. I surprised Debbie by taking her to a couple of beaches where she wasn't allowed to wear a bikini. At first, she wasn't thrilled and was shy. But after the first few hours of camping, she felt like a fish in water. I discovered that she had a tendency toward exhibitionism. The sight of her walking along the beach with that tan will stay with me for the rest of my life. It didn't hurt that she was probably one of the 3 most beautiful women on all the beaches we visited. When we got home, we rested and were ready for family life. I started a 6-month rotation of day shifts, working the day shift for the first time since I started my internship. This limited the amount of side jobs I could take, but it allowed us to be together every evening. It also helped us reconnect with old friends from school whom we had rarely seen in the last few years. Financially, we were comfortable. So much so that at least half of Debbie's salary went toward paying off her student loans. We wanted to get serious about paying them off before we had children. Almost every weekend, we went to parties or rock bars to dance. We even managed to go camping twice before it got too cold. The group of friends we had formed in school had become a close-knit circle. We were all fairly young, had children, or were planning to have them in the near future. Some of us would occasionally go out to bars together, but mostly we would get together for barbecues, chili parties, or just parties at someone's house. I was sorry when it was time to go back to night shifts. On the one hand, it would make it easier to do my lucrative side job and household chores, but on the other hand, it would limit our social life. I had about 6 months left before I got my journeyman's license. And once I got that, I would be able to rotate day shifts more regularly. One side effect I hadn't thought about was the reduction in our sex life. The fact that we were home every night prolonged our honeymoon period. All winter long, we lit the fireplace 4 or 5 times a week. It seemed like every time we cuddled in front of the fireplace, we forgot about everything except each other. When I went back to working nights except on weekends, sex practically disappeared. Debbie didn't like me waking her up in the middle of the night when I came home, and in the mornings she was in too much of a hurry to get to work to wake me up and do anything. In the end, we decided that one of us would take half a day off during the week just to spend time together. Once a week, either she took the day off or I took half a day. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best we could do. Winter turned to spring, and I was rushing to finish a few things before summer. I had almost finished installing the hot tub on the patio and had signed a contract to have a fence installed. I was also finishing renovating the workshop above the garage. We started talking about having a baby and how we wanted to decorate the nursery. One day, the conversation turned to child safety and the benefits of using a video baby monitor to keep an eye on the little ones. Since I was an electrician, I went even further and installed an intercom throughout the house. I even connected the patio and workshop to it. Now, wherever you were, in the house or in the garage, you could keep an eye on the nursery. Around the same time, several other electricians asked me to become a junior partner in the business they were starting. The contracting work was picking up, and we decided we wanted to run it as a full-time business. I ran a second phone line into the house and the workshop so we could work on them separately. It wasn't necessary, but it allowed us to write off the expense on our taxes. When the weather got warmer, Debbie and I started going on long weekend camping trips about once a month. Sometimes we took 1 or 2 other couples from our church with us. Sometimes we went camping just the 2 of us. In June, Debbie completed her first year of ministry. This milestone prompted Debbie to stop taking birth control pills. And in July, we celebrated our first anniversary. We wanted to do something special and often talked about a trip to Yellowstone Park. We decided that August would be a good time, and John and Katie asked if they could come with us. Gradually coming out of my stupor, I realized that I was sitting in a deck chair on the patio, staring into space. I had finished washing the van and didn't even remember doing it. 3 years we had been dating, gotten engaged, and married. From the moment we met, she was the only one I wanted. Could she do this with me? I thought about John and what I knew about him. He had graduated from Gabrielle's school a year before Debbie. They knew each other but weren't friends. John owned a construction company with several partners, including his best friend Craig. Craig and his wife were also part of our circle of friends. I had known John for several years, but I hadn't made any friends until Debbie came home from school. I remembered hearing a story a while back that John had a partner who had suddenly left the business amid rumors that John was having an affair with his wife. Nothing more came of it, and I decided it was just bar talk. John and Craig were real party animals. They arranged to spend Friday evenings with other builders. They touted it as an opportunity to make business contacts. I remember John's wife, Kathy, complaining bitterly that it was just an excuse to get drunk and sit around doing nothing until the bars closed. As I sat there, mulling over the jumbled thoughts racing through my head, I suddenly remembered a strange incident. Last winter, shortly before I changed jobs, I was working on some equipment at an auto plant. I noticed 4 or 5 guys in suits and hard hats walking down the aisle. I was idly watching them when one of them looked familiar. It was my former college roommate, Josh. I called out to him. He stopped, and his face lit up when he saw me. We hugged and patted each other on the back. He had some free time, so we had a cup of coffee in the cafeteria. It turned out that he had gotten a job with a California company as a manufacturer's representative for equipment delivery. Buddy worked in the Chicago office, and one of his clients was General Motors. His territory covered Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. He said he spent every Monday in the office and was on the road from Tuesday to Friday. We talked about work, and I told him about the internship program and my intention to return to university and get a degree someday. But then I laughed and said, "Of course, my wife will have something to say about that." A surprised expression appeared on his face. "You're married? Congratulations, when was that?" I told him it was last August and asked if he was still single. He just shook his head and said he was too busy to get into a serious relationship. "So tell me her name," he asked with a smile. "Come on, Josh, you know her. Debbie Koenigsegg, you introduced us before I even graduated from high school. Remember?" Of course I remember. She was Miranda's roommate in college. "So you got back together after college?" he asked, puzzled. "Of course not, Josh. I wasn't going to let her go once I found her. We dated for the last 2 years of school and even got engaged before our senior year." A whole range of emotions flashed across Josh's face that I couldn't quite decipher before he said weakly, "Oh, I didn't know that." Suddenly, he looked at his watch and said he didn't have time and had to go. I walked him to the door, but before he disappeared, I asked him for his business card and said I would call him. He replied, "Sure, sure." He shook my hand and quickly left. At that moment, I was surprised by his sudden desire to leave. Over the next month, I called him several times to arrange a meeting. Both times, he said he was busy and would call back, but he never did. Now, when I think about his reaction as well as other fragments that came to mind in my discovery this morning, I realized that he was shocked by the news of our wedding. I suspected that he knew something about Debbie and was trying not to talk about her. It followed that what he knew was not good. I took his business card out of my wallet and thought about it for a few minutes before making a decision. It was Monday, and I knew he would be at the office. I grabbed the phone from the kitchen and quickly dialed his number. When he answered, I said quietly, "Josh, it's Dave." "Oh, hi, Dave. How's it going?" he asked cautiously. "I was hoping we could meet up this week while you're in town," I said. "I don't think this week is going to work." "Listen, Josh, I know you're giving me the cold shoulder, and I'm pretty sure I know why. I found out some things about Debbie that I'm sure you know about, and I'd really like to talk to you about it." I said it simply. There was silence on the line for a couple of minutes before he replied, "Are you sure you really want to do this, Dave? Wouldn't it be better to just forget about it?" "No, Josh, because whatever it is, I think it's still going on. We were good friends once, and I believe you'll be honest." There was another silence, and finally he said, "Okay, Dave, I can change my plans and come tomorrow. Is that okay?" "That's great, Josh. Let's meet at the Westgate Tavern next to the factory. You know where that is?" "Sure, I can be there by noon." "Thanks, Josh. I know you don't want to do this, but it's very important to me." We hung up, and I went back to my business, tidying up after my trip to Yellowstone. I thought about working on a couple of projects around the house that were in progress, but then I thought, what the hell? Doesn't it mean anything anymore? The next day, I arrived at the bar a little before 1 and sat down in a corner. 15 minutes later, Josh walked in and noticed me. He came over, shook my hand, and sat down without smiling. Beer and a burger? I asked. He nodded. We ordered. And for a few minutes, we just stared into our glasses. Finally, I said, why don't I tell you about my life from the moment I met Debbie until we got married? Then you can tell me what you saw from your perspective in college, okay? I told him about how we dated for a year, how we broke up, and how we got back together. I told him how much I loved her and how I tried to make her mine. I told him about our engagement and the year leading up to the wedding. How happy it all made me. I told him about the ups and downs and all the little things that now make me doubt. When I finished, Josh cleared his throat and said, I don't think I understand what's bothering you, Dave. Then I told him about the trip to Yellowstone, what I found while cleaning out the van, and the conclusion I couldn't escape. When I finished, Dave looked at me with disgust. Damn women. And he shook his head. He paused for a few minutes, then said, you know I still see Miranda from time to time? I shook my head. No. She still lives in her hometown of Milwaukee, but she comes to Chicago on business sometimes. Anyway, after we met you and you told me about the wedding, I called her and arranged to meet her for dinner when she was in town. She's usually pretty friendly. We dated a few times in college, even slept together once, and we're still friends. But as soon as I told her I'd met you, she decided to keep quiet. I got angry at her and accused her and Debbie of trying to steal you away from me. I made her feel so bad that she finally told me everything. And I think she felt relieved. Miranda and Debbie were roommates for the last 3 years of college, and it turns out Miranda was the only person Debbie trusted with her secrets about you. I should warn you, Dave. Some of them are pretty nasty, he said. Oh, they can't be worse than what I've imagined, I replied bitterly. Well, that's for you to decide, he said awkwardly. You didn't know that I spent my first semester of junior year in Europe on exchange. That's partly why we lost touch. When I finally came back for the second semester, I forgot that you and Debbie had been dating before I left. Debbie was living the same way she had the previous year, seeing guys a couple of times a week, but this time her relationships were more serious. She would date a guy for about a month. As soon as he started getting serious, she would dump him. And she slept with these guys, and it wasn't really a big secret. I suspect Miranda was acting pretty much the same way. Anyway, Miranda said Debbie just couldn't stay away from guys, even when she was dating them at home. She told Miranda she had everything. A boyfriend who loved her and freedom 400 miles away from home, where she could do whatever she wanted. Then she convinced you to go with Miranda to Texas for spring break. The guys from the fraternity were going there and invited Debbie and Miranda to join them. I don't think Debbie thought much of it until she came back and saw that you didn't want anything to do with her. She couldn't accept it. She told Miranda she would do anything to get you back. Then, when Debbie came back for her senior year, she told Miranda she was engaged to you. Miranda thought that meant everything had changed, but it didn't. Debbie picked up where she left off in the spring. But, 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 how could she hide it? She had a 3/4-carat diamond engagement ring, and I gave her a 2-year-old Jeep for Christmas that was registered in my name. Damn it, she came to see me almost every month, I said. Josh shrugged. She never wore an engagement ring at school. She told everyone that her father had given her the Jeep. Anyway, in May, before summer vacation started, Miranda and Debbie agreed to rent a house near campus for their senior year. Miranda's boyfriend at the time was involved in the deal. Oh yeah, Tom. He answered the phone when I called there one morning, I said weakly. Josh looked at me with pity. Miranda's boyfriend was Dan. Tom was Debbie's boyfriend. He had been living with her since last school year. She asked him if he wanted to live with Dan when he moved out. They split the expenses between the 4 of them instead of the 3. All 4 of them lived in that house until they graduated. I covered my face with my hands and tried to stop myself from shaking. Damn. That's not all, Dave. All 4 of them went to Florida for spring break. I heard that Tom paid for Debbie's trip because they were taking her. That is, your SUV. I shook my head. How could she and Miranda hide me from their boyfriends? I called them every week and sent them text messages. They knew Debbie was seeing someone at home, but they pretended it didn't matter. Miranda was the only one who knew it was serious. The night before prom, A group of seniors threw a private party at a fraternity house. Debbie and Tom seemed to spend the whole night there. When they got up in the morning to go to prom, Debbie told Tom she was going home and getting married. He didn't take it very well. Two things came to mind. First, the angry guy at the graduation ceremony that Debbie was trying so hard to avoid. And second, the fact that Debbie didn't want to spend the night with me when we got home that evening after she had spent the previous night with her boyfriend. It wasn't hard to guess why. God, I was such an idiot. I'd been fooled from the start. How could you be such a cold, deceitful bitch and hide it for so long? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Josh turned away from me and said, I don't know, Dave. She just did it. Miranda and she were friends, but in the end, it shocked even her. And the last thing she wanted was to be Debbie's girlfriend and look you in the eye. Hell, she was still seeing Dan during the wedding and didn't want to bring him because she was afraid he'd say something. We talked some more and had a beer. I couldn't swallow a bite because I was afraid I'd throw up. I knew there would be more tears later. Finally, Josh said, What are you going to do, Dave? It's over, Josh. 3 years. I put 3 damn years into this relationship. 3 goddamn years she lied to me over and over again. From the day I met her, she was the most important person in my life. But apparently, our relationship meant nothing to her, I said bitterly. We sat in silence for a few minutes while I gathered my thoughts. Now I understood how a person could kill in a fit of passion. Everything you told me happened before our wedding. I need to find out what she's doing now so I can find some peace. And maybe I'll find out why. Then she'll be in the past. I said this through clenched teeth. When we finally said goodbye at his car, I said, I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell Miranda that we're together. I don't want Debbie to suspect that I know anything. Of course, Dave. Call me anytime. I'm sorry I brushed you off. I just didn't want to be the center of attention. We shook hands and parted ways. I got home about an hour before my shift started, just in time to answer Debbie's call. She usually called during the day, and if we didn't get a chance to talk, I would call her during my lunch break at work. I tried to act as natural as possible, even though her voice made me furious. She had teased me when I was planning to come home early this week to play a joke on her. I tried to sound regretful when I told her I couldn't take time off this week because many people were going on vacation, which was a lie. Then she suggested I take Wednesday or Thursday off. I replied regretfully that I had a side job those days and wouldn't be home. Another lie. Suspecting she wouldn't agree, I said I'd be home all day Friday if she was interested. She hesitated, then said she couldn't find time on Friday. We said I love you, and hung up. I stared at the phone longingly, remembering John's words from the trip to Yellowstone. He said he would be working in Southfield all week, but whispered with a laugh that he would be back in time for happy hour on Friday. I found Kathy's work number and dialed it. When she answered, I asked if John had left town, and she said no. I said I wanted to borrow a couple of tools from him. She said he'd be back on Friday, then added ironically that it would probably be just in time for happy hour. I said I'd get in touch with him over the weekend and hung up. I figured that if Debbie and John were seeing each other regularly, they'd meet up again at the first opportunity. Considering that John would be away until Friday and I would be home all weekend, it made sense that Friday night would be my best chance. And then I remembered something that had happened over the summer. On Saturday morning, I got up before Debbie. I took my coffee out to the patio and saw that the hot tub was a mess. The cover was off, and there were several empty beer cans lying around. A couple of wet beach towels were thrown over the railing. When Debbie got up, I asked her about it. She was a little embarrassed and said that after work she had gone out for a drink with a couple of girls from the office and they had come home and used the hot tub. She apologized for not cleaning up after herself. Now I wondered who had actually been in the hot tub. Since then, she has mentioned several times that she is going out with her friends on Friday night. As I went to bed that night after work, I realized that I couldn't bear the thought of sleeping next to her. I ended up sleeping on the bed in my office. She was so surprised that she called me a couple of hours after she got to work and asked why I hadn't gone to bed. I told her I thought I had an upset stomach and didn't want to wake her up. She suggested I take some Pepto-Bismol and go to bed. Before hanging up, she said, "By the way, did you check the pH level in the hot tub after we got back from Yellowstone?" I replied, "No, of course not." "Can you do that, dear? I don't want it to be too far off if we want to use it," she teased. When she hung up, I thought, someone's going to be using that hot tub and it's not going to be me. Whatever it is, it looks like it's going to happen here on Friday night. I immediately decided that I would take Friday off. That evening at work, I started thinking about how I needed to gather information and evidence. I knew that with the help of my electrician friends, I could probably bug the house, but it would be difficult to do in such a short time. Then I had an idea. The intercom system I had installed when I was a kid. The next morning, I grabbed my tools and started removing the faceplates from the intercoms. I discovered that by switching just a couple of wires, I could lock each unit in transmit mode. I switched them all, including the one on the patio next to the hot tub. Now, the only unit that received a signal was in my workshop above the garage. I checked them all with a portable radio. From the workshop, I could hear the radio in every room. Deciding to go even further, I ran to the electronics store and bought half a dozen ultra-sensitive miniature microphones. I replaced the microphones in the intercoms with these and found that it increased their sensitivity by about 20%. When I finished, I sat down in my workshop and thought that now that I had the ability to monitor what was going on in the house, I should be able to record this information. I had an old tape recorder that one of the electricians had given me to play with. I used to record music on it and turn it on from time to time while I was working on it. I took it out and connected the microphone to the speaker of the intercom. I tested it by turning on the radio in several rooms of the house and turning up the volume. Everything worked perfectly. The reel was so big that I thought it could record more than 6 hours. I stood up and looked out the attic window. The garage was at an angle where I could see the backyard, the patio, and the sliding glass door leading into part of the kitchen. Upstairs, I could also see into the bedroom window if the curtains were open. But at night, I would probably only see shadows unless the lighting was right. I decided that sound would be sufficient for my purposes. That evening after work, I called home as usual. Debbie and I chatted, and she said she missed me and wanted me to come home early. I pretended that I missed home and was sad that I couldn't make it. I told her we'd talk on the weekend. She casually asked if everything was okay with the hot tub, and I said it was fine. Another lie. That night, I slept on the pull-out bed again, just like I had all week. On Friday, Debbie called just before I had to leave for my shift. She said she wanted to let me know that after work she was going out with her friends for drinks and maybe dinner. She wanted me to know in case I called and she wasn't home. I said that was fine and that I was working overtime that night, so I'd be home a little late too. The blatant manipulation and outright lies, which were now so obvious, simply stunned me. And she was so calm. How could I have allowed myself to be deceived for 3 years? Because of her beauty? Was I so in love with love that I didn't notice everything else? Did I have some serious character flaw that allowed her to treat me this way? Pondering these questions, I drove the van into a dead end a couple of blocks from our house. In our sparsely populated neighborhood, there was a path through the woods that allowed me to reach the back of the garage unnoticed. I went in through that back door and went up to the workshop. I sat down wearily in the old, worn-out chair that stood there. Leaning back, I closed my eyes, suddenly feeling tired from several days without rest and constant nervous tension. Suddenly, I opened my eyes and realized that it was already dark both inside and outside. I was awakened by the sound of the garage door opening. I looked at my watch and was surprised to see that it was almost 8. I had slept for almost 3 hours. I tiptoed to the door leading to the garage and opened it slightly. I saw a Jeep pull up and made out Debbie's head as she got out. I crept up to the attic window and saw the edge of the car on the driveway. And in the dim light of the porch, I could make out John standing there. They hugged, then headed for the house and disappeared. Through the intercom, I heard keys jingle in the lock, the door open, and voices. I quickly turned on the tape recorder and sat down on the workbench, where I could see out the window and watch the back of the house. Just wait," Debbie said, giggling. I heard John mumble something in response. "I need to go to the bathroom. Pour me a glass of wine and grab a beer," she said as she walked through the kitchen. As she passed by, I heard her press the answering machine button on the kitchen table and hear the reply, "No new messages." A minute later, I saw that the light was on in our bedroom and walked past the open window into the master bathroom. I heard the phone ring, the toilet flush, and water running in the sink. Meanwhile, John was rummaging around in our pantry, clinking bottles. I heard him open a bottle of wine and pour himself a glass. Then the refrigerator door opened, and I heard him pull the cap off a beer. I clenched my teeth because it was obvious that he knew where everything was and felt right at home. Debbie came out of the bathroom and returned to the bedroom window. She went to the dresser and pulled something out of the bottom drawer. Standing up, She draped it over her shoulders and tied it. The shiny silver fabric told me it was one of the perios I had bought her in St. Martin during our honeymoon. She turned toward that door, and the bedroom light went out. A moment later, in the dim light of the kitchen, I saw her walk past the sliding glass door. "Wow, what a dress," John said. "Thanks, did it catch your eye?" Debbie asked and laughed. "I think Dave is getting all the attention," he replied. "The sarong I bought her on our honeymoon," I thought bitterly. She usually saved it for special occasions. Now she was wearing it for him. "Damn it, let's just go upstairs, Debbie," John said, almost whining. "We have the whole night ahead of us. Dave is working late." They sat, drank, talked, and laughed as if they didn't care. It was obvious that they were comfortable there and together. It was obvious that this wasn't the first time. John got out of the tub and grabbed another beer. When he returned, he stood on the step in the water in front of Debbie. "Did you see Craig's face when we left the bar and you asked if I could come over for an hour?" He laughed. "Yeah, I think he was just a little jealous," she replied absently. John took a sip of his beer and said, "Yeah, he was a little upset. But you've had a good time with him before. You tell each other everything, don't you?" "Usually," he said with a slight chuckle. "It was just once and it will never happen again," she said firmly. "Oh, why?" "Because the difference between you is that Craig has a few beers and can't keep going. But you, honey, no matter how much you drink, you always stay normal." After a while, John said, "The sex in the van in Yellowstone was just amazing. It was great to suggest a trip to the countryside so we could be alone." Debbie laughed. If Dave and Kathy knew, all they talked about was the lake, fishing, and the views. "Ha, I think I had the best view, and God, I needed it." "It was the only time the whole trip," John complained. "What's the matter? Things not working out with Katie?" "It's fine by her standards. Ever since Jake was born, she's been on a sex for procreation, not pleasure policy. Now every time I want to have some fun, I have to negotiate." Debbie laughed. "Poor thing. It's a good thing you took me up on my invitation to Friday cocktails and we hit it off so well." "Thanks to Dave. If he hadn't gone in for his second shift, I probably never would have asked you out. Besides, if it weren't for me, you would have just picked up someone else." "Maybe, but you're the most beautiful woman I've ever been with. But yes, I have to thank him for not doing your job. Don't get me wrong, he's great, but you're here and he's not." After a few minutes of silence, John said, "Why did you guys get together in the first place? It doesn't seem like real love to me. When I was in college, I had a lot of boyfriends, but I liked having a boyfriend when I came home. Dave became that guy. He was persistent and sweet, good-looking. When we were together, I thought it would be nice to get married. But then I would go back to college and I wasn't so sure anymore." "But when you had all those guys in college, what made you decide to do that?" "Damn, John, look at this house. It could be in Best Homes and Gardens magazine. He makes at least twice as much as all those frat boys. Sure, he works twice as hard. But Dave gives me everything I want. I've got him wrapped around my little finger. When we have kids, I'll probably never work again." Debbie sighed and threw her head back. "Oh yeah, I'll have it all. A beautiful house, a beautiful car, a couple of kids, and a husband who makes a lot of money and is kind enough to switch shifts a couple of times a year so I can have some fun. What more could a girl want?" When she said that, I went numb and leaned back against the wall. I felt like I'd been hit. Was that all there was to our relationship, just money and stuff? "Since we're talking about what a girl wants, why don't we go to the bedroom for a minute?" John suggested. "Come on, Debbie, let's go upstairs." "Sure," Debbie said, giggling. "Okay," I thought, I've heard enough. It's time to get this jerk out of my house." I took out my work phone and dialed our home number. When the phone rang, I heard Debbie say, "Quiet, it's probably Dave. Damn, I told him not to call." "Aren't you going to answer?" John asked. "No, let the answering machine pick it up." After the fourth ring, the answering machine kicked in. After the beep, I tried to sound normal and said, "Hi, baby, you're probably not home yet. I'm still not feeling very well today. My boss let me leave early, so I'll be home soon. Bye." Leaning back in my chair, I watched and listened as everything around me flew in different directions. Debbie jumped up, grabbed a towel, and said, "John, you have to go." "What? Why? We have time?" No, he told me that sometimes he can get home in 15 to 20 minutes if there's no traffic and he runs all the lights. I have to clean up and look like I just got home before he gets there. Now get out and help me cover the hot tub." John continued to grumble and complain as he helped her with the cover. Damn it, John, shut up and get dressed. She picked up his clothes and threw them at him, and I heard her pick up the beer cans. They both went into the house, and I heard her tell him to call her next week, then slam the door. I'd listened as his car started and drove out of the driveway. I stopped looking out the window and leaned back in my chair. For a while, I heard Debbie bustling around the house, the TV playing, and dishes being washed in the sink. I sat there thinking about my life, my marriage, and my future. The last thing I heard from the house was Debbie's irritated muttering. Damn it, Dave. You ruined my evening, so where are you? And I thought, isn't that too bad? I closed my eyes for a few minutes, then realized I hadn't heard a sound in a long time. I looked at my watch. It was past midnight. The house was quiet and dark with only the porch light on. I turned off the tape recorder, got out of the garage through the back door, and walked back to the van. When I got to the house, I stopped on the driveway. Without turning on the headlights, I quietly slipped into the house. Not wanting to sleep, I took a beer from the refrigerator and went out onto the terrace. I sat in the dark, looked at the stars, and thought about how tomorrow I would have to kill myself. Depression hung over me like a dark cloud. Sighing, I got up and turned toward the house. As I did, my foot caught on something that rolled toward the jacuzzi. I bent down and picked it up. It was a wallet. I went into the kitchen and opened it. In the dim light, I saw John's driver's license. I slowly climbed the stairs and paused for a moment at the bedroom door, listening to Debbie's steady breathing. I turned to my study and hid the bed so I could sleep alone again. I threw the wallet on the table, and a bunch of things spilled out of it. I took out a package labeled Trojan Ultra Thin. Slowly putting it back on the table, I lay down on the bed and covered myself with a blanket. I slowly woke up to the sunlight streaming through the window. There was a faint sound of running water coming from the bathroom. Everything that had happened the day before came back to me overnight. Staggering, I got to my feet and wandered into the other bathroom to do my business. After that, I washed my face and looked in the mirror at my red eyes. I returned to our bedroom just as Debbie came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel. Hi, baby. What happened to you last night? She asked. What do you mean? I replied, a little embarrassed. You said you'd be home early, but you didn't show up. She came up to me and kissed me on the lips. Unplanned stuff, the boss wouldn't let me leave until midnight, I said. Are you feeling okay? You need to shave, honey, she said. I'm still a little nauseous, I replied. She smiled softly at me. I have something that will make you feel better. I stood there, motionless, looking into her eyes. So what can you offer me, you slut? You want to get pregnant, don't you? Then, next time you go on a date with John, tell him not to use a condom. Debbie's face turned as white as the sheets on the bed. Her mouth opened and closed without making a sound. Or maybe Craig did it. Of course, you'll have to keep him away from beer so he lasts long enough. Finally, Debbie squeaked. What? What did you say? I brought my face close to hers and said grimly, I think you heard me. Now get out of my house, I practically shouted. She was so shocked and surprised that she rolled away from me, fell onto the other side of the bed and landed with a thud. Her head peeked out from behind the bedding and she stared at me. Her eyes were wide as saucers and her mouth was hanging open until she finally managed to stammer, You don't, you're not making any sense. No. How about Tom Terrific? You remember Tom? Your roommate in your senior year of college? I said it sarcastically, which made her gasp. I turned to her drawers and opened a couple of them. I threw her a pair of jeans and a shirt and said, Get dressed. You're leaving. She got up from the other side of the bed and started screaming. But Dave, I live here. Not anymore. Now get dressed or you're going out there like that. I grabbed my clothes and ran out of the room. I pulled the phone book out of the drawer and found the number for Yellow Cab. I called and asked them to send a cab as soon as possible. Debbie sat on the edge of the bed and sobbed. What don't you understand, bitch? I wanted only one thing, for her to get out of there as soon as possible. I rummaged through the closet and threw her a pair of sandals. Please, Dave, I love you. Don't do this to me. In a rage, I replied, You love me? What the hell does that mean? You're a lying, fickle whore who doesn't know what love is. She collapsed on the floor, crying and covering her head with her hands. She just sat there on the floor, covering her face with her hands and sobbing. I grabbed a glass of water and poured it over her head. She hissed and struggled to her feet. She was so upset that she had to hold onto the table to keep from falling. At that moment, a horn honked from the driveway, and she looked up and whispered, What's that? That's your taxi. You're going for a ride. But, what about my SUV? I have an SUV. No, the SUV is mine. It's registered in my name, remember? She watched in horror as I took her bunch of keys and removed the house and car keys. Then I threw the keys into her purse and shoved the purse into her hands. Come on, let's go. I took her by the arm and pulled her toward the side door. She tried to speak, sobbing and hiccuping, but I didn't listen. I pushed her into the back seat of the taxi and closed the door. Leaning into the cab, I handed the driver $50 and told him to take her to 5935 West Barnes Road. The driver glanced back at the almost hysterical woman in the back seat. Are you sure? He asked. Yes, she lives there. Here's another 20 so she doesn't come back here. Okay. He quickly put the car in reverse and drove out of the driveway. I watched them drive away, then slowly returned to the house. I took a beer out of the refrigerator, collapsed into a kitchen chair, and stared at the wall until my rage subsided. It was over. It was really over. For almost 3 years, my life had revolved around thoughts of Debbie. Everything I did was aimed at making her happy. When I realized it was over, I felt broken and lost. For a while, I just sat there, tears streaming down my face. Eventually, I started thinking about what to do next, what to do after this, and so on. And then I laughed with relief when I realized I had a plan. And my life wasn't over. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number. Carl, it's Dave. I wanted to let you know that Debbie is on her way to your place. She's not welcome here anymore. You can send someone to pick up her things, and no, I don't want to talk about it right now. Bye. And I hung up. I sat there, sipping my beer and feeling the tension leave my body. When the beer was gone, I went upstairs, took a long hot shower, shaved, and put on clean clothes. I stood in our bedroom wondering where to start. I grabbed a few boxes and threw all of Debbie's toiletries into them. Then I started emptying the contents of Debbie's closets and drawers into trash bags. When I was done, there was a huge pile on the floor. I took the box to the room to pack Debbie's college textbooks. While I was doing this, I noticed John's wallet on the table. Puzzled, I picked it up and started flipping through it. Making up my mind, I picked up the phone and dialed her number. After a few rings, Katie answered. I had always liked Katie. She was smart, beautiful, hardworking, and fun. I felt uneasy about what I was about to do, but she deserved to know the truth. Katie, it's Dave. Is John there? Hi, Dave. He's still asleep. Can you ask him to call you when he wakes up? No, just tell him he can come and pick up his wallet anytime. His wallet? How did his wallet get there? She asked, puzzled. I think he lost it when he took his pants off last night. Is this a joke? She said, starting to laugh. I don't think so, I replied, completely serious. Okay, why did he take his pants off? Well, he had to take them off to get into Debbie's hot tub. Dave, this isn't very funny. I said it wasn't funny. Is Debbie there? Let me talk to Debbie. Debbie doesn't live here anymore, Katie. There was a moment of silence. Then, oh my God, he didn't, oh yes, he really did it. I have to go, she whispered into the phone. Tell John I really want him to come in and get his wallet. I want to talk to him. I said it with determination. Without saying a word, she hung up. An hour later, I was dragging another bag of Debbie's things into the garage when a car pulled into the driveway. I stopped and saw Sarah get out of the car and walk toward me. She stopped, put her hands on her hips, and said, She finally got to you, didn't she? Yes, I admitted, my heart sinking. She looked at the pile of bags I was filling and asked, No chance? Not a chance, I replied firmly. She nodded in agreement. Did you come for her things? I asked. No, I came to see how you were doing. What? I asked, confused. Oh, I'll take them when I leave, but I came to see if you really broke up with her. And did you really throw my shovel in the water? I don't understand. Dave, I've been in love with you since you started dating Debbie. When you got back together after you broke up, I told her she'd better treat you right or I'd deal with her. Now, I think it's too soon for you to date your ex-fiancé, but I want you to know that I'm interested. Think about it. Now help me load her things into the car and I'll get them out of here. Before getting into the car, she said, By the way, Debbie's home. Mom and Dad are trying to keep her from having a nervous breakdown. I think getting caught finally destroyed her little fantasy world. It seems like there is justice in this world after all. She laughed, kissed me on the cheek, and left. I watched her go, completely baffled. I didn't know what to expect when she came over, but it certainly wasn't this. A few days later, Katie came by to pick up John's wallet. I played the recording for her, and she started crying. Wiping her eyes, she said, "I know this wasn't the first time. I'm almost certain he had an affair with his former business partner's wife a couple of years ago. He suddenly went bankrupt, and John couldn't explain why." As she left, she asked me to make her a copy of the recording. I agreed. Carl started calling almost every day, insisting that Debbie and I talk. About the fourth time, I didn't just say no, I said no way, rewrote the recording, and sent it to him. After that, he called only once to apologize to me. I also sent a copy to Kathy and my lawyer. Later, I learned that Kathy and John had broken up, but were planning to go to marriage counseling together. I didn't wait to have Debbie listed as the owner of the house. After all, I had kept records and signed every dollar I had invested in it. In the end, I agreed to give up the Jeep, as there were some doubts that it was my gift to her. A few pieces of furniture and a division of the cash in our checking and savings accounts completed the division of property. I think having the records discouraged Debbie and her lawyer from pursuing any further claims. They clearly didn't want me to lose the case in court. Once I was satisfied that the house would not be considered joint property, I put it up for sale. I didn't want to live there. I had bought and renovated it for one reason only, and that reason was gone. The house was a painful reminder of a part of my life that I wanted to leave behind. The house sold fairly easily, and as I expected, I got a good price for it. Around the same time that the divorce was finalized, I received my journeyman's license. Once everything settled down, I decided to return to my dream of going to college. Electrical engineers with a degree in electrical engineering are always in demand. I took a leave of absence from the car factory and returned to university. The money I received from my parents was more than enough to cover the tuition for the remaining 3 semesters and my basic expenses. I continued to work in the partnership for 15-20 hours a week. With this money and my savings, I was able to live comfortably. So I rented an apartment near the college where I was studying. As it happened, Sarah was also studying at the same college. Coincidence? Maybe. It has an excellent engineering department. Sarah and I continued to meet about once a week to have lunch, a drink, or just chat. She kept me informed about everything Debbie was doing, and I didn't have to ask anything. Carl and Angela disliked her so much that as soon as she got her Jeep back, they asked her to move out. Shortly after the divorce, she transferred to a store in the suburbs of Detroit. Now they rarely see her. Debbie tried to get me to talk to her before and after the divorce. She passed messages to me through Sarah because I refused to take her calls. I asked her to tell Debbie that I was living my life and she couldn't give me any advice. Sarah and I continued to grow closer. I recognize that there is undeniable chemistry between us. And every time we meet, she playfully reminds me of her interest in a relationship. I've come to terms with the idea of a new beginning, and she seems to be completely on board. Recently, she symbolically suggested that we move in together to save money while we both finish school. So far, I've resisted, but I think she senses that I'm weakening. Is there such a thing as the K-13 curse? If so, I'm probably doomed. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next video.